We all know that saving money is important for our financial future. However, if the statistics are to be believed, a lot of us haven't saved as much as we probably should. Granted, it's not always our fault that we have less money put away than we'd like. Sometimes we just run into a rough job market or experience some major and unavoidable bills from something like an extended health scare. But other times, it is something that's within our ability to control. And that's both a great thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because, in those cases anyway, where our level of savings is within our ability to control, it means that the main reason we don't have as much money put away as we'd like is because of something we either did or didn't do. And that's not always an easy thing to admit to ourselves. But, by the same token, that also means that if we change some of the things that we do or don't do going forward, we can start saving more money and get our finances back on the right track. And that's great news. With that in mind, today I'm going to be going over several budgeting tips and tricks that we can use to save more money and kickstart our journey to financial independence. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. And if you want to further support this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left in the description below, which includes a 30-day free trial of Audible and 2 free audiobooks of your choice, as well as a list of some books on money I'd recommend checking out with your free trial. One reason why we might overspend is simply out of ignorance. If we aren't very aware of where our money is going, either because we don't regularly budget or haven't looked at our expenses in a while, it can be easy for our money to leak out in unexpected ways. Now, it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but if you do have a handful of spending categories like eating out or shopping online that you find yourself spending money on a couple more times a month, that can add up to a noticeable amount over time and make it much more difficult to save as much money as we'd like. The simplest solution to this is to, of course, keep track of our spending. If awareness is the primary challenge that we're facing, then the best way to do this is likely through some sort of comprehensive budget, such as the zero-based budget. A comprehensive budget is a budget that has you list out your income and all your expenses, as well as how much money you want to devote to each of them, then adjust those targets as needed until your total expenses match your monthly income. In other words, you give every dollar you earn a job to do before the month begins. What makes a comprehensive budget better in this particular situation than something like a percentage-based budget, such as the 50-30-20 budget popularized by Elizabeth Warren or T. Harv Eker's 6 Jars budget, or even most other popular budgeting styles, is because it forces you to list out all of your expenses from your mortgage or rent payments to food and insurance and even irregular costs like renewing your driver's license or getting new car tabs. Whereas percentage-based budgets generally have you focus on a few different broad categories of spending, such as necessities, wants, and savings in the case of the 50-30-20 budget, without having to get into the nitty-gritty details of every line item that falls under those broader categories. And as a result, it does less than a comprehensive budget to help you in terms of becoming more aware of your spending so that you can figure out where your financial leak is coming from and then plug it. A second reason why we might overspend is because we don't have a very clear understanding of what is and is not worth spending money on to us. This can lead to us feeling like we're wasting a portion of our money each month because we're not devoting as much money as we'd like towards the things that we actually value. One other sign that we might be dealing with a lack of financial clarity could be that we often find ourselves experiencing buyer's remorse. There are a couple common solutions that people have used in order to gain more financial clarity as well as develop a better understanding of what they value spending money on. The first is a values-based budget. This budget often works similarly to a comprehensive budget in the sense that you often find yourself listing out most, and sometimes all, of your expenses, but the primary goal isn't to raise your financial awareness of your spending. It's to find ways to direct as much of your money as possible towards things that you care about the most, through analysis of your spending and experimentation with ways to become more financially efficient, so that there's more money left over for those things that you want to focus on. A second tactic people use to achieve greater financial clarity is to undergo what's known as a spending cleanse. A spending cleanse is simply a self-imposed challenge where you force yourself to not spend any money on anything that isn't an urgent need for a predetermined amount of time. The primary goal is to flush out your system by forcing yourself out of your normal habits and patterns so that you can discover what things are punching above their weight class, so to speak. In other words, you want to find out what you really miss and what things you could easily live without, or just live with less of. It's very helpful in situations where you're unsure of what you really value the most because you actually get to experience life without it. If you're interested in learning more about spending cleanses and how to do one yourself, I did a video about it earlier on this channel, which I'll leave a link to in the description below. A third reason why we might overspend is because we don't fully appreciate the impact that our spending can have on our financial situation, both now and in the future. I mean, we obviously know the impact spending can have on the surface. If you have $10 in your pocket and spend it on a bunch of candy or a monthly Netflix subscription, well then you no longer have $10 in your pocket. But when you dig deeper, you realize that the impact of spending goes much, much further than that. Because while there's nothing wrong with spending inherently, the fact remains that, just like with any other financial decision, or just decision in general, it comes with an opportunity cost. That $10 can now no longer be put towards your retirement, for instance, or anything else. And as just about any investor or financial professional will tell you, due to the effects of compounding interest, even small, regular bits of overspending can, over time, put us quite a ways behind the 8 ball financially. Two ways that people often try to recontextualize their spending to put things into broader perspective, beyond the obvious one of determining how much money you could accumulate in your retirement nest egg if you were to instead invest that money over time, are using the 300x rule and the real hourly wage. The 300x rule is basically a way of recontextualizing spending based on how it impacts financial freedom. It does this by showing you how much money you'd need to save and invest to maintain those costs with your nest egg alone. As such, it tends to work best with regular, ongoing expenses, like that Netflix subscription, or a new car loan, as opposed to one-off items like those candy bars. It's based on research done by retired financial advisor William Bengen, which found that a well-diversified investment portfolio should be able to sustain inflation-adjusted withdrawals of at least 4% of your savings each year for at least 30 years. Translated into English, what this means is that for every $1 you spend each year, you need roughly $25 put away in order to support that spending with your investments alone. By extension, for every $1 you spend each month, you'd need roughly $300 put away to support those costs with those investments alone, hence the name. So while a $10 monthly Netflix subscription only costs you $10 in the present, if you were to keep it when you transition into retirement, when you're living on your investments alone, it would require at least $3,000 in savings to cover. What you have to ask yourself is whether that amount of additional savings is worth building in order to keep the expense. If it's something you enjoy, the answer will almost certainly be yes. However, if it's something that you may or may not use all that much, this recontextualization may make you stop and think twice about it. Maybe you decide to stick with just one subscription service at a time instead of having them all at once, for example. The real hourly wage, as discussed by author Vicki Robin in her best-selling book, Your Money or Your Life, attempts to accomplish something similar by having you figure out how many hours of work it would take to buy something, after subtracting necessary work-related expenses like transportation costs. Sure, a $700 iPhone may not sound too expensive if you're earning $50,000 or $60,000 a year, but once you figure in the taxes that you have to pay on that income, the cost for transportation and parking, and any other work-related expenses you may have, it can add up to a fair number of hours. Again, this doesn't mean that buying the iPhone, or whatever it is you're looking at, is a bad thing, but by recontextualizing the spending in this way, you can get a broader sense of the impacts it can have on your financial situation, and it'll hopefully help to ensure that you don't make a purchase that you later regret. A fourth reason why we might overspend is due to our habits and triggers. Think of things like shopping or going out to eat as a way to relieve or cope with stress, or alternatively, to celebrate a promotion or some other accomplishment, or just browsing Amazon out of boredom. I mean, I know I've done that a few times in my life, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. These are things that we may have done for a long time, and now it's just a habit. We do it without really even thinking about it. And if we've been doing it for a long time, we may not even really remember why we started doing it in the first place. Common solutions to this situation is to take up journaling to gain more self-awareness, or speak to outsiders. Friends, family, maybe even a counselor, just to get someone else's viewpoint on the situation. Because if we can get a better understanding of ourselves and what financial triggers we have that lead us to engaging in habits or behaviors we don't like, then we give ourselves a much better chance of being able to come up with a game plan that'll help us to create changes that we want. Or, as the case may be, just stop doing the habit entirely. A fifth reason why we might overspend is because our financial discipline fails us. This usually results in us buying something on impulse. And look, it's understandable. We're bombarded with advertisements, social pressures, and expectations, and a whole host of other cues that can make overspending a very tempting proposition each and every day. And it's been found in studies that our willpower to resist these temptations declines the longer and more frequently we have to actively fight against them. As it turns out, our willpower and discipline work pretty similarly to our stamina when running a sprint. Sure, before the race begins, we may have a lot of energy, but after maybe running flat out for 10 or 20 seconds, or maybe more if you're in better shape than me, our muscles start burning and we start struggling to catch our breath. We don't have that same energy anymore, at least until we get a chance to rest. Same thing happens with our willpower. Thankfully, this makes the solutions rather obvious. First, whenever possible, limit your exposure to environments or activities that make you feel pressured to overspend. Second, if avoiding these temptations entirely is not feasible, build a habit of delaying discretionary expenses for at least a few days. This trick is often known as the 72-hour test, since you're forcing yourself to wait at least 72 hours before actually buying the thing that tempted you in the first place. It's really good at helping you to avoid making those impulse purchases, as well as avoiding buyer's remorse. Because most things that we find ourselves tempted by in the heat of the moment, but likely wouldn't really use or enjoy, tend to be more or less forgotten about fairly quickly, as we get busy or distracted by other things that come up throughout the next few days. Third, whenever you know you're going to be in a situation where you may feel pressured to overspend, leave your plastic at home. Credit and debit cards are great in the sense that they are extremely convenient. However, they also tend to allow us to spend more money than we would otherwise if we were paying in cash. This is especially true for credit cards if we overspend and then can't pay them off by the end of the month. By leaving your cards at home and taking only the amount of cash that you're willing to spend with you, you'll significantly decrease the likelihood that you'll overspend, at least in any backbreaking amounts. Many people do this when grocery shopping, as that's a common area for people to overspend. And planning out what you want to buy and then bringing as much cash with you as you need to buy those things is a great technique in that situation. Others adopt this approach for their whole budgets. It's known as the envelope method, or the cash-only budget, because people using this budgeting style will often segment their cash into different envelopes, or some other storage location, and mark them based on what the money is supposed to be used for. And fourth, short-circuit the problem entirely by paying yourself first. If you automate your savings decisions via direct deposits from your paycheck, you're less likely to blow your savings on impulse purchases. Though, admittedly, it still doesn't stop you from overspending and going into debt, so these other techniques can still be necessary. A sixth reason why we might overspend is due to financial lethargy or discouragement. This is particularly common when pursuing large, long-term goals, such as saving for retirement. The endpoint can seem so far out there in the distance that it might as well be unreachable. Perhaps the best solution I've found for this is to break the larger goal down into smaller, bite-sized chunks that can be accomplished in a more reasonable time frame, and to reward yourself regularly along the way. This can help you feel like you're always making tangible progress, make it more difficult to justify abandoning your savings plan in favor of something more important in the short term, as well as help keep you motivated over the years. Because especially with goals like saving for retirement, we're all going to experience some bumps along the way. It's just part of the ride. A seventh reason why we might overspend is because we just aren't being as efficient as we could be. Now, there can be any number of reasons for this, from not knowing where to look to find deals, to not having enough time to do the research in the first place, or just lacking the energy to DIY a project. Perhaps the best solution for this is to get creative and reach out to others. It's unfortunate that many of us have found ourselves overspending in the past, but because overspending is such a common experience, it also presents an opportunity. Many of our neighbors will have recently bought a couch or something else that they soon realized they didn't really need and would be willing to sell it to us for cheap. Maybe we could join a local buy nothing group, which are fairly common on Facebook and elsewhere on the internet, and trade with others in our community to get the things we need for cheap, or maybe even sometimes free. In some cases, we may be able to find ways to reuse or repurpose old items. And then, of course, there are the tried and true practices like waiting for sales to buy things, couponing, and looking for deals in other ways, and so on and so forth. We don't have to do all of these things, but every little bit helps. So those are 7 reasons why we might find ourselves overspending from time to time, as well as some techniques to help us overcome them. This isn't an exhaustive list of reasons or of solutions by any stretch of the imagination, but I do hope that you were able to find something in this video helpful. What other tips would you utilize to avoid overspending and save more money? Let me know in the comments section below. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.